Hello everyone, welcome to 10-Minute Physiology. In today's video, we're going to see how the autonomic nervous system affects smooth muscles. So with that, let's give it a go. So we're going to begin with the sympathetic nervous system, and specifically with the postganglionic neurons. So the postganglionic neurons are the neurons that project onto target tissues. And the postganglionic neuron in this case is projecting onto a smooth muscle cell. So this is the plasma membrane of a smooth muscle cell, and this is the sarcoplasmic reticulum of it, and inside you have a high concentration of calcium. Now, the sympathetic nervous system, specifically the postganglionic neurons of the sympathetic nervous system, are going to release a number of different signaling molecules, and we're going to talk about 3 of them in this video. So the first one we'll talk about is norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter that is released from the postganglionic neurons of the sympathetic nervous system, and the norepinephrine is going to interact with the alpha-1 adrenergic receptors. So the alpha-1 adrenergic receptors are GQ-coupled protein receptors. So when norepinephrine binds to it, this will activate the GQ protein, which will allow it to activate phospholipase C. Phospholipase C converts PIP2 into IP3 and diacylglycerol, and then IP3 will move through the cytosol and interact with the IP3 receptors on the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The IP3 receptors open, allowing calcium to flow from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the cytosol, and then the calcium increase will facilitate vasoconstriction. So that's how norepinephrine does its signaling. So what is the second one? So the second one we'll talk about is neuropeptide Y. So neuropeptide Y is a peptide neurotransmitter that is released from the postganglionic neurons of the sympathetic nervous system. So neuropeptide Y will bind to the Y1 receptor, and when it does so, it increases calcium through an unknown mechanism, therefore facilitating vasoconstriction. And then the third signaling molecule is actually ATP. So ATP is stored in the same vesicles as norepinephrine is, and ATP, when it's released into the synapse, will bind to a ligand-gated ion channel called the P2X receptor. So the P2X receptor, when it binds to ATP, will open, allowing sodium and calcium to flow into the cell. And when you have an increase in calcium, this leads to vasoconstriction. So these 3 signaling molecules, when they interact with these receptors, produce vasoconstriction or constriction in smooth muscles. So now we're going to talk about epinephrine. So epinephrine is highly tied to the sympathetic nervous system. It is released from the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys. So epinephrine can actually bind to both alpha adrenergic receptors and beta adrenergic receptors. And when it binds to the alpha adrenergic receptors, it is going to cause vasoconstriction. When it binds to the beta adrenergic receptors, it causes the opposite effect, vasodilation. And we'll talk about the reason why in a little bit. So it's important to realize that each of these receptors has a different sensitivity toward epinephrine. So the alpha adrenergic receptors are less sensitive to the epinephrine than beta adrenergic receptors are. But when the alpha adrenergic receptors are activated, they are going to override the effects of the beta adrenergic receptors. So as a result, when there are high levels of epinephrine in the blood, alpha adrenergic signaling is dominant, which causes overall vasoconstriction. And when there are lower levels of epinephrine, beta adrenergic receptor stimulation is dominant, producing vasodilation. So let's take a look and see how these things occur. So let's start off with the beta-2 adrenergic receptor. So the beta-2 adrenergic receptor is a GS-coupled protein receptor. And when epinephrine binds to it, this causes the GS protein to be activated and interact with adenylate cyclase. So adenylate cyclase will convert ATP into cyclic AMP, and then cyclic AMP will activate pKa. pKa will then phosphorylate myosin light chain kinase, which therefore causes vasorelaxation. Now remember that epinephrine can also bind to the alpha-1 receptors. So when it binds to these receptors, it causes vasoconstriction. So now what we're going to do is we're going to summarize the effects of the sympathetic nervous system when it interacts through the alpha adrenergic receptors and when it interacts through the beta adrenergic receptors. So remember, when you stimulate the alpha adrenergic receptors, this is going to cause constriction. And we can see this constriction in blood vessels, specifically in the skin, the GI system, the renal artery, and the brain. But we can also see the constriction of smooth muscles in the uterus, the vas deferens, of erector pili muscles, the uterus in pregnant women, urethral sphincter, as well as the bronchioles. Now, the beta-adrenergic receptor can cause effects too. So when you stimulate these receptors, it can cause the dilation of arteries in the skeletal muscles, the dilation of bronchioles, the relaxation of the non-pregnant uteruses, as well as constriction of GI sphincters. So now we're going to finish off this video by talking about how the parasympathetic nervous system affects smooth muscles. So in this diagram here, we have two things. So this red cell here is the endothelial cell. So these are the cells that surround blood vessels. And the pink cell here is going to be the smooth muscle cell. And the postganglionic neuron of the parasympathetic nervous system is out of view. So on the endothelial cells, we have muscarinic receptors. And muscarinic receptors, specifically the M3 receptor, is going to be a GQ protein-coupled receptor. Now, when acetylcholine is released from the postganglionic neuron of the parasympathetic nervous system, the acetylcholine will interact with the M3 receptor. This will activate the GQ protein, which therefore activates phospholipase C. So phospholipase C will then convert PIP2 into IP3 and diacylglycerol. The IP3 will increase calcium levels, and the calcium levels, when they increase, will activate a specific enzyme called ENOS. So ENOS forms nitric oxide, which diffuses from the endothelial cell into the smooth muscle cell. Now you can also get nitric oxide be released from the postganglionic neurons. So the postganglionic neurons have their own nitric oxide synthase enzymes, which produce nitric oxide. The nitric oxide will diffuse from the postganglionic neuron into the smooth muscle cells. So the nitric oxide can then activate a specific enzyme called guanylate cyclase. Guanylate cyclase converts GTP into cyclic GMP, and then cyclic GMP, through a number of processes, will cause relaxation. Now, another important neurotransmitter that is released from the postganglionic neurons of the parasympathetic nervous system is going to be VIP. So VIP will interact with the VIP receptor, and the VIP receptor will lead to a decrease in calcium, and the decrease in calcium will lead to relaxation. So in this video, we talked about how the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system affected the smooth muscle cells, and I hope this helped you understand these processes. I thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time.